Welcome back, everyone. Today I wanted to go over how I made my own trim and my own baseboard. I know it's a little different from my videos where I build kind of furniture, but I thought this would be a really good one to show you. And more importantly, how much money I saved actually making it on my own. And I didn't just do this for one room. As you can see, I did this for my entire house. That's how positive I am in making this stuff. And I really hope you guys get some ideas on how to do this. This was not very hard at all. In fact, this was really fun as well. And as a bonus, I'm actually gonna go over all of the actual amounts it took me to do this. So stick with me into the end, and I'm gonna go over pretty much some rough numbers to let you know just how much this would cost you and how much I saved in the end. So the first thing you need to do if you're gonna decide on making your own trim and baseboard is it's a better idea to start off with the door trim. And you wanna make sure you measure your tallest door first. Because what's gonna happen is you're gonna make these in bulk. That's kind of the big key to doing this. And my tallest door was, I think, a little over 80 inches. So I took these 4x8 sheets of MDF. That's what trim is made out of, just regular MDF. And I decided to cut about a foot off the top. The reason why I'm doing this is gonna be clear in a minute. But I wanted to show you the best thing to do this with is actually this Craig Rip Cut. This thing is so handy and it wasn't very expensive. This is really good if you have a lot of really big sheets of plywood or MDF or something like that and you don't exactly have like a huge shop like mine. Mine is actually not a very big shop despite kind of what the videos show. But this really does make cutting huge sheets of plywood so easy. So what I did here was I cut a foot off the top of this MDF piece. And you're not going to want to toss that. You're going to want to be kind of careful because this is actually going to come in handy very shortly. But once you do that, just kind of find a place where you can kind of put it to the side. And then after that, you're going to want to determine how big of a trim piece you're going to want to use. For me, what I actually did was I emulated this piece I used for my bathroom. And I figured I can make this pretty easily. So I decided to kind of use this. I found out the measurement. These were about 2.5. So I measured a little over 2.5. I think I added like a couple of millimeters to it, which would give me some playroom. But once I found the size that I was going to use, you want to lock this down and you don't really want to change these measurements because you're going to have to join all of these up when you're cutting trim. As many of you know, when you're cutting this, you kind of need them all to be a universal size so your corners will match up. So it's kind of, once you get it started, you kind of want to keep it going. So whatever you do, don't change this. Try not to kind of do other projects while you're doing this because you're going to kind of mess up your measurements. But as you can tell with this rip cut, it's really handy. The only obstacle I had here was when I was cutting these strips over and over, especially when it came down to making the MDF a shorter piece. As you can see, I had to kind of hold it back there and kind of run it up the side while holding the piece. I kind of messed up the very top corners, which for trim pieces is not a big deal because as you all know, you're gonna cut them into corners anyway. So it's not a huge deal, but this was an issue I was gonna have to solve when it came time to making the baseboards because the baseboards were gonna be cut in 8-foot pieces as opposed to this being cut in 7-foot pieces. But you know, it kind of goes along. Once you kind of get it down to a more manageable piece, you can run it through a table saw to kind of get your final numbers. You know, this did take not a lot of time, but it did make a huge mess. MDF is basically just compressed dust. So when you cut it, it makes such a massive mess. So you're probably gonna wanna use a mask of some sort here because it's really hard to kind of contain all this dust no matter what your dust collection system is. But once I did that, I ran through the last of this 7-foot piece. I ran these through at their final cut number like I did with the other pieces there. So the kind of bonus to doing it now in this more manageable piece was I didn't have to kind of cut them and then recut them into their final piece. It worked out really well. And again, I think the final length for this was about 2.5 inches was what I went with, which gave me a really nice kind of width piece. This is also 3/4 inch MDF, which a 4x8 sheet of this weighs roughly about 3,000 pounds. I'm not sure what it actually weighs, but 3/4 inch MDF, a full sheet is so heavy. So it is going to be important that you do this in as many manageable pieces as you can, because it is kind of hard to work with. Once you get them down into strips though, it's no problem. It's actually really easy to work with. And again, this is where cutting off that top foot piece comes in handy, because while those pieces I cut were 8-foot pieces, I was able to get 4 more 4-foot pieces out of this, which meant I could run these across the top of all of my doors. And since I cut 2 4x8 sheets, I was able to get 8 4-foot pieces, and it really extended the life of that MDF piece. This is where I'm gonna cut the shape into the actual piece. So I kind of had to play with my table saw a little bit here. I think my final angle that I was cutting with was going to be about 30 something ish degrees. If you're going to use this exact design, you're going to have to play with it a little bit, but I think it was like a little over 30 degrees or something like that. But again, you're going to have to kind of work up. So use these kind of end cut pieces, because when you think it's not going to be enough or it's too much, it might not be enough. So slowly work up to it. Use a lot of these kind of end cut pieces before you try this, because you're going to want as many of these pieces as possible. Once you find a pretty close piece, I was really happy with that, but I figured I could do a little bit better. So I did one more practice pass through. And once I did that, that ended up being pretty much perfect, actually. So as you can tell, very close to the store-bought piece. And I mean, you can't quite tell just yet from the camera, but these were already coming out to be like very close to the store-bought pieces I bought. I was really happy with how this was turning out this way already. When you're cutting a thicker chunk of MDF, not just kind of the edge piece, your dust collection will collect it, but you will still have a lot of dust. But look at that, almost exactly perfect from that. So if you cut these down like that, you're gonna end up with a really nice design. Very nice, very clean, very modern and contemporary. So now that I got that, I had to make sure I got a good playlist going, because I had to cut about 30 4-foot pieces. Sorry, I had to cut about 30 8-foot pieces and 8 4-foot pieces. So once I got that, I started off with the 8-foot pieces and just cut them over and over. It was pretty monotonous, but I mean, the end result, you're not going to be able to argue with the money savings you did on this. Just take your time and look at that. What a cool little piece. We are going to need to sand a little bit, but that's not going to be hard. After I cut all 30 of those and 8 of the 4-foot pieces, it was time to kind of sand the edge, because I used a bit of a rough blade here. This unfortunately did take a few minutes. I think it took me about an hour and a half to kind of sand all these. So if you can maybe get yourself a better blade, it might be worth it. Or if you kind of have the time to kill, you're definitely going to want to sand these, because the first thing people do when they see kind of like not baseboard, but door trim, is they do run their hand over it. So make these as smooth as you can. Just get a regular sander, and that'll do the trick really well. However, when you're sanding down the 8-foot pieces, you might want to set up something on your table like this, so they don't kind of like jump all around while you're sanding it. That was one issue I kind of had. So as you can see, I have a couple of stop blocks and I have a couple of clamps on the edge here, which kind of really gave me the edging I need to kind of press my sander up, but didn't let it kind of fall all over the place. It was, you know, a little time consuming, but it was well worth it in the end. I mean, look at that. It's such a clean look. I was really happy. As you can tell, like, these were the 4-foot pieces. They look absolutely beautiful, even without the primer. But next up, when you paint these, you're going to want to find yourself the cheapest primer you can. MDF, unpainted MDF, is a sponge. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It will soak up so much of your primer. So just get the cheapest one you can because you're gonna go over it with a pretty high quality paint after that. One obstacle I did have with this that I wasn't expecting was the space I needed to actually paint these. It was pretty annoying. I actually had to paint these in about a 3-day stint because I only had so much time in the day to work on them. But I thought I could kind of just all lay them out and spray them. Unfortunately, I didn't take into consideration just how small my shop actually is. So just a heads up, I did come up with a really good way to kind of do all of these in a shorter time span, which I'm gonna go over with you as I get ready to do the baseboards. However, I'm not gonna go over how I cut and put these up. This is such a touchy subject with a lot of carpenters on how to install door trim and stuff. All I'm gonna show you here is that it can be cut and installed exactly like you would any other door trim piece off the shelf. It's really cool how this came out so easy to work. I think you're gonna be absolutely blown away at just how good this came, because this is basically the same material that you would get from the box stores. But it definitely cut and it definitely installed exactly like anything you'd get off the shelf. So, don't rip me on how I install this stuff. I'm just kind of like a home renovator that I do stuff for myself. But again, this came out great. And however you kind of join your corners, it will work just like the box store stuff. You're gonna be really happy with this. This is kind of how I solved the problem I had with my Craig rip cut here, on how I would run through and cut these kind of small pieces. A lot of people will put like a sacrificial insulation board underneath their boards and just kind of cut over top of that. But that was gonna waste a good like 40 bucks, and I was really trying to save myself as much money as I could. So what I did was I actually took some of these scrap pieces and I kind of drilled them into my workstation here. That kind of gave me this nice, really kind of extension arm. And you're gonna see in a minute just how well this worked. But what I did was I kind of just threw together this, this kind of middle piece I needed to cut through. As you can tell, it's not quite cut perfectly, but it's a sacrificial piece. I mean, the thing is meant to be kind of cut over. And it was great because now I can run my boards over top of this. And then just kind of as I go, I'm gonna be cutting just this very small piece over top. And what happened was kind of exactly what I expected to happen. Was when I decided to cut the pieces, I had to first find my measurement. I was gonna cut these into 4-inch pieces for the baseboards. That was my desired measurement here. So I measured out the 4-foot pieces, and again, once you're locked in, you're not gonna wanna move this because you're gonna need these to be as uniform as possible. So once you kind of got your specific size of a baseboard, which by the way, another great reason to do this is you can really make these exactly how you want them. But cutting these, and then as I kind of cut over the sacrificial piece, it was like nothing. I kind of felt it a little bit, but once you were past, it was great. And look at that. I didn't have to hold it. I didn't have to hold it in place. I didn't kind of mess up the edges of each piece because you're going to want these as long as possible. And look, you cut them and each corner was exactly the same size. And that's it. Just this one little nick in each piece. And that was perfect. This little change that I made with scrap wood was so handy for cutting massive 4x8 sheets in what's essentially a pretty small shop. My shop's only like 16 feet wide, so running an 8-foot board from end to end isn't exactly that doable. But look at that, no hands, I didn't have to hold it up. I could run it right through, and I didn't have to sacrifice a $40 or $50 piece of insulation board underneath. And another big bonus was, as I got smaller and smaller, I was able to cut this even though I only had like 8 inches left of a board. It just kept going. It was perfect. It was super handy to do this. Another thing was, once I kind of got the hang of exactly where I put each piece, I kind of just kept running over the same spot, which meant I didn't damage these pieces anymore. It was it kind of worked out even better than I expected. So if you're going to be using a Krebs rip cut, if you have one already, maybe consider doing this instead of sacrificing, a pretty expensive piece of insulation board. A little kind of weird as it got smaller, but it still worked. It was great. But look at these pieces. I can actually reuse them over and over. I think the final number that I had was about 45 boards. I just kept cutting and cutting and cutting, and the whole thing took me maybe a little over an hour. And that's only because I had to recharge my batteries over and over. So if you have a corded saw, it's going to take even less time. So that was it. Just a quick rip cut and over, and that's great. So now it's time to put the edging on them. I used a bit of a chamfer piece. This isn't the one that I used in the end, but it's similar. So just to give you an idea, so what I did was, most of you are probably going to recognize the style that I just used. This is a very, very popular baseboard style right now, and I'm super happy because all I needed to do to add the design to it was just run this through my router each one. It was about 45 pieces. Once I got it to the size that I wanted, it was perfect. And you're gonna see in a second the style that I went with. This is on every shelf in every box store right now because it's a really nice baseboard. But look at how easy it is to make that. So much easier and so much cheaper than buying just full pieces. The only downside to this is in my little shop, I wasn't able to kind of make longer pieces. I am gonna show you my personal trick for kind of joining baseboards. Because even if you have 14 or 16 foot pieces that you can get at the box store, I've got a wall in my house that's 26 feet long. So even if I bought this at the store, it was still going to need it to be joined at some point. But once I got these cut down, I just ran my sander over it. Again, I kind of threw just a jig together there so that these pieces weren't gonna fishtail all over the place, which was a bit of an issue I was having with the first one. Once I threw my clamp up and it kind of kept it from wiggling all around, it worked out really well. But I just ran my sander over it. I think I used 150 grit, which is about as smooth as it needs to be. Really, it smoothed out all of those router pieces. And this worked so good. This was my little solve for not having enough room to get these all sprayed in one shot. What I did was, instead of lining them all up side by side, I put them all kind of in the middle of my shop. Because one of the obstacles I was having while spray painting the door trim was trying to get in the edges. So I figured this time I would spray all of the edges with the primer, and as you can tell, the MDF just soaks it up like a sponge. So I decided to kind of get these all lined up together and get the edges sprayed. I mean, you don't need to spray the bottom. You could probably save yourself a little bit of primer, but like I said, I went and got the cheapest one. I think this can cost me like $18, and that's Canadian. So if you're watching from the US or UK, it's probably going to be even cheaper. But once I did that, I got the edges sprayed, and then instead of trying to spray them all, I did them one by one and kind of moved them to their final drying place. And it seems a little weird as I'm explaining it, but trust me, this worked out amazing. I was able to kind of spray each one, make sure each one got a really good coat. The hardest part to this was just kind of trying to hold it in a spot that wasn't going to kind of ruin everything. But it's not a big deal because the bottoms you're not going to see, and the tops are going to get, a little bit of caulking around the top and then repainted with your final paint. But look at that. I just sprayed each one and then moved it to its final spot. And these are great. I mean, they look wet right now like that, and they look amazing. But just look at this when they're dry. It's like literally I bought these off the shelf and I made these for like less than half the price. Such an amazing kind of thing to do. I'm really happy with how these turned out. I'm actually blown away. But like I said, because these were only 8-foot pieces, I needed to join them in my house. Now, if you have a bigger shop, you can kind of join them in the shop and make them kind of perfect pieces so that when you nail them along the wall, you won't have kind of this issue. Unfortunately, that option was not open to me. So what I had to do was I would join them, and I've had this problem before, so I've done this quite a few times. I kind of just nail them in kind of as close as you can, but this is a really old house, so it doesn't matter. The walls are all wonky. So what I like to use, believe it or not, is not wood filler, but mudding. Some of you are probably like, yeah, I already know that, but some of you are probably like, yo, you're crazy. But trust me, guys, mudding and MDF work so well together. You can easily use mudding to kind of join these corners together. And you're going to see in a minute, this works amazing. I've actually been doing this for years. But once you and don't be shy, mud the whole edge. And as you can see, it's kind of a little rough, not a big deal. So you're just going to get yourself a cheap old sanding sponge and just run it flat across the board. And you're going to get yourself a nice flat piece, and you'll never know that these were two pieces joined. And I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like in a minute. But just to give you an idea, you definitely want to shape up your top pieces and your front pieces kind of as close as you can. So, take a little bit of time, sand these down. It's a little more annoying than having to get a full piece to cut through. But like I said, you're saving a good chunk of money. So, I also use mudding for my nail holes. I find they kind of cover them a lot cleaner as soon as after you paint it instead of caulking. And of course, you definitely need to vacuum up the sand before you actually finish, because as you vacuum the sand away, it's going to kind of show that maybe you didn't sand it exactly perfectly. But once you vacuum it away, you'll see that last little part. And you'll get the hang of it. But look at that. Once you're here, you can see a little bit of a line, but that you can't feel that line. It's just because of the sanding. So once you get it painted, you're going to see in a minute, it's absolutely amazing. So, take and hey, even if you bought this stuff off the shelf, you're going to have to paint your trim too. So this isn't an extra step you have to do. This is something you're going to do. So, don't worry about this part. Just paint over it once you've sanded it, and it's going to look absolutely beautiful. And I know a lot of you are thinking, yeah, you probably just did this for one room, but I didn't. I use this for my entire house. And look at that. This is the 26-foot wall that I have here. It's the biggest wall I have, but you absolutely cannot tell I joined the pieces at all. There are the pieces there. There's the kind of where I matched them up with the door trim. The baseboard pieces are less than 3/4. I think they were like 5/8 or something like that. So you always want your baseboards to be thinner than your door trim, because it's going to look a lot nicer when you put them together. You can use the same, but I suggest using them a little bit thinner. But look at that, the door trim, after you kind of put your edges together, and like I said, I use mudding, you might use caulking, but this stuff cuts and puts it all together just like anything you get. And if you're wondering how much I saved, well, I priced it out. And all the door trim and all the baseboards was gonna cost me roughly $750 to do this, and that was Canadian. Now the baseboards and the trim, to make them, the door trim cost me 2 pieces of MDF, which was $50 each. It was just under, like $49, so $100 there. And the baseboards were 3 pieces of the 5/8. And I'm actually going to round up here and say they were a little less. They were like $43, but I'm going to also kind of round up so I can add in the primer that you needed. So that was about another $150 there. So I saved, after all said and done, was a little over $500 to make this myself. And in my opinion, that's totally worth it. I mean, look at how nice that came out for the door pieces and everything. Guys, I really hope you liked this video. If you did, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me.